Welcome everybody to MoAD Learning and our Curator on the Couch series. I'm Fiona Bowen, a learning facilitator here, and today we are joined with Libby Stewart to talk about Senator Neville Bonner. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. So welcome, Libby. Today we are going to be talking about Senator Neville Bonner.
Yes.
And particularly through the lens of an exhibition that we have here called Finders Keepers. And the reason that we're presenting this is so teachers can use this information as part of the cross-curricular studies in terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. And we have some wonderful objects upstairs in our Finders Keepers exhibition, and they're going to be useful for teachers to be able to use in the classroom.
Absolutely, I think they will. The Finders Keepers exhibition just generally is 5 collections from different individuals, all held within the museum's collection. And one of those, of course, is a collection that belonged to Senator Neville Bonner, who, as we know, was the first Indigenous federal parliamentarian and the first Indigenous parliamentarian to work in this building. And he joined politics formally, or entered Parliament in 1971, but before that he'd had a long and very busy life, and so trying to select objects from what is quite a large collection, Bonner collection, we really wanted to showcase as many different aspects of his life through those objects as we could, and because it's such a rich collection, we've been able to do that. So it really charts his life from quite early days right through his whole political career and then afterwards as well.
That's a good opportunity as well. We've got a little clip that first we'd like to show you all, which outlines a little bit about his entry into federal politics. And so we're going to watch this first, and then we'll recap and start talking about some of the objects. So this is a section from our Whispers in the Corridor.
My grandmother once said to me, if you learn to handle the Queen's English, people will not question your education. And I think I've fooled a lot of people for a long time. When I went to Canberra, I had to borrow $5 off my young man who is now my stepson, young Rory, to go to Canberra. That's all the money I had. But the day I was sworn in was a very emotional day for me. I could visualize, I could hear voices. And amongst those voices was the voice of my grandfather saying, it's all right now, boy. You are finally in the Council of the Australian Elders. I saw my responsibilities as a parliamentarian was my almost all-consuming, burning desire to help my own people, the Aboriginal community, to become respected, responsible citizens within the broader Australian community. I was a new boy in Parliament. I was the first Aborigine ever to go into Parliament. I was treated totally as an equal on my feet, but I think there was a feeling that I was a lesser person. I was a member of the party, fiercely, proudly a member of the party, but I was not blindly a member of the party. I had a conscience, and political parties don't need people with a conscience. They want bottoms on seats and hands in the air at the right time. Whilst we, the Aboriginal people, the first Australians, make up 2% of the Australian population, there is not an Aboriginal voice in the federal parliament. Rightly or wrongly, I feel that there'll never be another one in my lifetime. I am Neville Bonner, proudly an Aborigine and proudly a member of this Australian community. I am a token for no person.
All right, so that clip shows us a little bit about Neville Bonner here in Federal Parliament, in this beautiful building, Old Parliament House. And the objects that we have in the exhibition, they're so varied. But the first one that I'd like to talk about is actually the Boomerang, or the Boomerang. If you can explain a little bit about that.
Yes, the Boomerang. So in his early years, Neville Bonner had very little education of his own. He really only had one full year of schooling in about 3rd grade in Queensland. So he was very much self-taught, and also taught a lot by his grandmother. But as a result of that, he went out to work very young, and he did all sorts of things. You know, he worked on cattle stations and you know, hard labouring jobs. It was quite a hard life. And one of the things he did in the 1960s was start a boomerang making business. He was reputed to be, and later proved himself to be, a very good boomerang thrower. And so he started this business called Boomerang, obviously using his name as a marketing hook, if you like. And he and his son Alfred, who was also known as Tiny, for a good full year would go out, and Neville Bonner was always insisted that boomerangs work best when they're made from natural materials, and he would go out and they would find particular trees, the roots of particular trees, cut the timber, take it back and shape it, and you know, it was a lot of work to shape these things into, you know, boomerangs that would fly well. And then his first wife Mona would paint them with traditional designs. And it was really hard work. They had to make between 400 and 450 boomerangs a week. They were working 7 days a week, really long days, just to make ends meet. So in the end, it became unsustainable. But we have this one Boomerang. There are quite a few still around the country, and they are remarkable pieces. And they just speak to his the tradition of boomerang throwing, his expertise in that area. And that expertise, it also speaks to his later life as a parliamentarian, because he'd only just done his maiden speech, his first speech in the Senate in 1971, when journalists were calling into question his Aboriginality, if you like, and questioning whether he really was this great boomerang thrower. And he said, well, I'll prove it to you. And right after his maiden speech, took one of his Boomerangs out into the Senate garden next to Parliament House here, and gave them a demonstration. And the media loved it. There are lots of great newspaper photos about him showing him throwing these, and the great story that he threw one, and he was a good thrower. It's just that he didn't realise there was a very large tree behind him, and so one boomerang went out and was coming back, but it landed in the tree. Seeing this thing way up in the tree, he said, well, we're not going to leave it up there. We're not wasting a good boomerang. Who's going to go up and get it? And no one volunteered. So he went up himself in his suit, much to the delight of the waiting media. So that's where we got all these photos.
And retrieved it.
Retrieved it. But he really proved his credentials.
Yeah, very good. It's a really interesting object to have in the exhibition.
It's wonderful.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, another one as well, we're talking about his passion for a variety of different causes, and the fact that people who support different causes often like to display the way that they support a cause through a badge, etc. And nowadays in social media, of course, there's different ways to do that. But he was a big believer in a group called Opel, and we have this badge in our collection.
Yes, we do, and that's on display in Finders Keepers because it was so important to him. Neville Bonner had lived on Palm Island with his first wife Mona, and had a number of children there for many years, but in about the mid-1960s, he went back to the mainland, and I guess Opel, or One People of Australia League, as it was called, was the first sort of formal organisation that he joined and really put his growing political skills to use. So Opel was formed in the early 1960s as a group to help advise the Queensland government on matters to do with Aboriginal affairs and to help Aboriginal people. And Neville became very committed to it. He joined the the state committee for them, and then later became its Queensland president. And he kept up that presidency even for several years after he'd entered the Senate here in Canberra. So really committed. And he often said that helping to create hostels for Aboriginal people, particularly Aboriginal women and single women and children, to live in were some of his greatest achievements.
And education was also...
Education was part of it too. They did a lot, a lot of advocacy work and actual physical hands-on support work. And in fact, when he got married a second time, it was at one of the Opel offices in Brisbane, I think, or Ipswich. He was very proud of that work and he always wore that badge.
So Libby, another topic that I'd like to explore is that he has all these achievements and passions, and a number of different people saw him supporting those causes, but we also have another wonderful object in the collection, the bark painting. And it's more a summary of his life as well. And would you be able to explain a little bit about why that's such an important object for us to have in this collection?
Yes, so that was one that came to us quite recently, really, only in the last few years, and it was very generously donated to the museum by Alfred Bonner, or Tiny, and because Neville had left it to him just before he died, actually. And it dates back to Bonner's days on Palm Island, where he had 4 children, and he and Mona also looked after a number of other young children as well and raised them. So family life was very important. And one of his extended family on that island, a man named Bill Kongu, was an artist, a local artist, and he, as a tribute, after Neville had joined the Senate, become a parliamentarian, as a tribute to him, he created this bark painting, which tells the story of Neville Bonner's life. And it's sort of in 4 stages, where the first stage shows, it really tells the story of Bonner's birth, which was under a tree on Eucharabar Island on the Tweed River, in northern New South Wales, and living in a humpy. His early days were really very poor and quite difficult. And then it depicts his life on Palm Island, because that really was a very pivotal part of his life. He had his children, and it depicts him going hunting and fishing, fishing for turtles and so on, and raising his children. His children are depicted there. And then it shows his sort of entry into politics and into the white man's world, because Neville Bonner's philosophy on the best way to help Aboriginal people was to really engage with the white man's system, that you had to work within that system to really make worthwhile change. And so that part of the painting shows black footsteps and white footsteps gradually intermingling to sort of indicate that path that he was taking. And then the 4th part of that painting shows four men, one of them obviously an Aboriginal man, and then 3 white men sitting in a circle, and that symbolises his formal entry into politics in Canberra. So yeah, I love that bark painting. It's just so evocative, and it also, I think, speaks to the respect with which he was held by people on Palm Island, and the recognition of him as the first Indigenous parliamentarian in federal politics.
And a challenging time as well, of course, being the first Indigenous politician.
Yes, absolutely.
And, as a member of Parliament, often they were expected to stay here very late, to sit and, when the bills were all being passed. And I understand that they were all given pillows in case they had to have a little nap afterwards to, catch some shut-eye. But one of the objects in the exhibition is one of these pillows. It's a red pillow, but if we look deeper into the story behind that pillow, it actually tells us so much more in terms of the challenges associated with him being the first Indigenous parliamentarian. Yes,
that's right. And right from when he first entered the Senate chamber and gave his sort of initial speech and said that, he felt the weight, he felt the spirit of all the Aboriginal elders who'd gone before him, with this weight of expectations that he was there representing, as the very first representing all of his people. But he was, a senator for all Queenslanders as well. So he put a lot of expectation on himself, and he said that he always felt the weight of that, that it was really quite a heavy burden to bear. And the other part of it was the loneliness that he felt. And I'll just read you a bit of a quote that Neville said about that. He said, it was worse being in this building in Parliament. He said it was worse than being out droving. I was treated like an equal on the floor of the chamber, neither giving nor asking quarter, but there were hours just sitting in my office and I went home alone to my unit at night. There was never one night when anyone said, hey, let's go out tonight.
Wow.
Which is just, when you think about it, is just awful. And yeah, there probably were nights when that pillow came out and he stayed in his office and had a bit of a kip, and so quite poignant, I think. It's one of the most touching objects I think we've got in our collection.
Yeah, and it's a really great example to be able to show what he was going through as a person.
Yeah, as a person.
As a person, and the challenges.
And as an Aboriginal man as well.
Very much.
Yeah. Yep.
And in terms of those support from the family. There's some other lovely objects in here to be out that show how much his wife, Heather, did support him. And the love that helped him through some of these troubling times as well.
Yes, yeah. So Heather was not an Aboriginal woman. He worked with her in Opel in Queensland. That's where they met. And it was actually Heather's daughter who encouraged Neville to enter politics formally. And he ended up joining the Liberal Party because of them, and that's an interesting story. But
he wasn't originally interested in the Liberal.
Well,
sort of side.
it was assumed he was actually handing out leaflets for the 1967 referendum in Brisbane, and a Labor Party stalwart called Bill Hayden, who you may have heard of, came up to him and said, you should join the Labor Party, that's the party for Aboriginal people. And Bonner was pretty outraged by that. He thought no one should make assumptions about who I'm going to vote for and who I should, which party I should be aligned to. And so he ended up joining the Liberal Party and stayed with them throughout his career. But so after he'd come to Canberra, he ended up marrying Heather. And she was, a real soulmate, absolutely kept him going. And the items that we have on display in the collection are a photo of the two of them gazing lovingly into each other's eyes, and it's wallet size because he kept it in his wallet, and it was obviously there, close to him throughout the day. And the other one is a brief snippet of a poem which really talks about, basically love, and that she was thinking of him and supporting him when she couldn't be here. Obviously, she was back home in Queensland and he was here. So because there were lonely times for him, I think that love and support of his family was absolutely critical.
Very, very interesting person to talk about, and particularly relevant to students studying Indigenous history and culture. So thank you so much, Libby, for your time today.
Of course, we have the Neville Bonner School here in Canberra, so he is
indeed
recognised, and the suburb of Bonner as well. So he's well recognised all over the country, and really important that school kids learn about him and his achievements.
Completely agree. And teachers, to help you back in the classroom, of course, we've got our Finders Keepers resource that we've put together for you, which can help you to explore some of these objects in much more detail, and unpack them and look at the historical significance of them. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you again to Libby for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again for another Curator on the Couch.